Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how I created this painted spray can scene in Maya and Substance Painter. I'll show you the full workflow, but in some parts I might speed up the footage when I'm doing repetitive tasks. So let's start by modeling the can. I have this reference image to help me with the dimensions and proportions. I created a cylinder and gave it 32 subdivisions, started to scale it and move the vertices according to the image plane. From there you can delete the top faces and start extruding the edges. You will also need to use the bevel command to properly recreate the shape of the can. As you can see, the modeling of this asset is pretty basic and easy, so I will speed up the video and come back whenever there's a new technique applied. So here I'm detaching the cap part and closing the can geometry with an extrusion and then merge the vertices to the center. Since I'm going to deform this top part, we need to create proper geometry, otherwise you might end up with some problems. Right, let's delete half of the model, because we can mirror it later. Do a bridge between the selected edges, and after it you can insert the needed amount of the edges with the Insert Edge Loop tool set to multiple edges. Now it's a matter of connecting the edges with the Multicut tool. If you have any problem with it, you can just delete the problematic faces and use the Append to Polygon tool to finish the shape. We can finally mirror the geometry. Make sure you have the correct axis selected. And let's also average the vertices on top to have a more even distribution of the geometry. Okay, let's create a cylinder that will be used to make the opening of the cap. As you can see, I made a mistake along the way and need to undo a few steps so I can fix it, right before we mirrored the geometry. Then it's just a repetition of what we've done so far. Let's create again the cylinder, position it, and add some edges to help with the Boolean operation we will perform. Okay, let's isolate the geometry with Alt-H and create a difference Boolean. Now you'll need to use the Target Weld tool to connect the vertices. Make sure you have no vertices on top of each other, if so, merge them. You can always rely on the polycount heads-up display on the top left of your viewport to make sure you have the right amount of vertices. Right, let's just add some bevels to the sharp edges so we can later on smooth it without problems. Here I created two lattices to deform the top of the cap, then you can just delete the history. So that's basically it for the modeling part. You just need to bevel a few more edges for the high poly geometry and finish off the model in the bottom of the can. Okay, let's see how to approach the UVs. Set your layout. In my case I set two panels side by side with the perspective and the UV editor. The first step is to start with the basic projection, either planar mapping or camera mapping will do. Next we need to select the edges we will cut. Select the resulting shell and move it to the side. We now need to do a final cut in the back of the can so we can unfold it properly. Make sure you deselect the edges from the other shells and also move them out of the way for now. Now we can do an unfold and align the shell. For the bottom, we can easily do an unfold and that's it. For this in-between part of the can, let's cut it in the end edge and move it down. The next step is just to select the back edges, cut them and unfold it. If you want, you can straighten the UVs. Okay, let's select the top edge and cut the next part. Make sure to cut in the back as we've been doing for the other parts. After unfolding it, we don't get the desired result even if we try the straighten UVs command. So let's instead select the faces and do a cylindrical mapping. Scale it down to fit in the UV tile. And for the unfold, if we use the unfold 3D algorithm, we get the same result as before. Instead, let's use legacy and unfold horizontally and vertically. The result is not perfect, but we can always use the straighten UVs command and manually adjust the UVs that are out of place. Finally, we can use the same approach for the final piece of the can and also for the cap. There's no need for more repetition, so I will skip to my final UV model. These are the current UVs laid out in a single tile. Let's export the geometry to see in Substance if we have enough resolution to paint with. Here I'm creating a project in Substance with the current geometry. And you will notice when I paint, setting the brush hardness to 100%, that if we go close enough, there's not enough resolution. You can easily see the pixelated look. Okay, one step I chose is to convert the geometry to high poly, and for that we will need to adjust the UVs. So let's convert the smooth mesh preview to polygons. Now in the UV editor we can unfold some of the parts. And the straight shells we can leave them the way they are for now. Just repeat the same steps for the cap geometry. In the UV editor, do an unfold for the more organic shells. Here I'm opening a scene with the high poly geometry and adjusted UVs. As you might remember, we still don't have the desired textile density. And in this scene I am showing you, I already have cut some parts and laid out into 4 tiles. Since we are only going to see the front in the final render, we can cut the UV shells into parts, as I'm showing you in this scene. The way we do that is to select the middle loops and cut the UVs there. From there you only need to connect the remaining parts, and for the more organic shells do a new unfold. In this scene you can see the final UVs and understand how they were cut. Both the can and the cap geometry use this workflow. On a side note, in between videos I scaled up the geometry to roughly 18 centimeters, so it matches the real world scale. Okay, now in Painter I'm going to walk you through the painting process, which is pretty basic, and focusing only on the parts we'll be seeing in the final render. One important step if you're using ACES in Maya and Arnold is to set the color management to Open Color IO and select ACES in the drop-down. Also make sure you're using UV tile workflow. So if we paint in the geometry, now we have enough resolution to go for a close-up render. The first step is to bake the mesh maps, although I didn't use them in this project. Right, let me disable all the layers and show you what we have here. In the base it's just a simple fill with a slightly greenish tinted grey and roughness set to 0.3. I duplicated the base fill and gave it a darker value for the base color. Created a black mask, then a fill that has a fractal, just to add some color variation to the base. After that I created a new fill layer, just affecting the roughness. Inside the same layer I added a fill with a painter's default grunge map, and on top a levels adjustment to make the values closer to the initial roughness value. Then we have this black paint fill. I am going to duplicate it, clear the mask and show you how it's quite easy. Just use the dots brush with the right size and paint it all over until you're happy with the result. Now for the pink paint, I used a combination of alphas, as you can see. Basically, you just need to paint a big portion and use some brushes or alphas to add the edge detail. I also used the Dirt 2 brush to add some details on top of the black dots, just adding and subtracting, using the X key switching between black and white fill. There's a particular pink paint detail where I used one of the default alphas to paint it. Make sure your brush settings don't have any jitter. As you can see in the viewport, I have this bump effect on the paint. This is quite easy to replicate. Let's duplicate the pink paint layer and affect only the height channel. Then in the height attributes we fill it with a grunge map. It's too intense, so in the layers tab drop down, switch to height and remove most of the effect of the specific fill layer. I forgot to mention that in the pink paint layer I also have a small amount of height to pop out the paint. Now for the white paint layer, it's just a duplicate of the pink paint, but set to white. Then use some alphas to add some paint drops and paint drips. As for the cap, I have a basic plastic material and a grunge map in the roughness, just to add some variation. With the levels to adjust the values. For the pink paint I just used the Dirt 2 brush and painted out a pattern. Then we can remove some of the opacity of the edges using a lower opacity. Added some drops of paint too, just using alphas once again. For this project I needed some variations for the remaining cans, so it's basically the same as we have done so far. Just duplicate the folders and paint some variations according to your reference. Now just export out the 3 different variations we created. Make sure to name it accordingly, so we don't override each set of textures. In this project I am using EXRs. In Maya, let's create a standard surface material. We will be rendering in Arnold, by the way. Connect a file node to the base color and choose the correct file in the source images folder. In this file node, set the UV tiling mode to UDIM Mary. As you can see, I made a mistake and chose the TX file, since I have done some renders before this demo. Make sure you select the EXR file. Now it's a matter of duplicating the file node and connecting the right textures. We have base color, height, and roughness in this case. For the place to the texture, we can use it in all file nodes. Just control middle click and drag from the place to the texture to the file, and it will make the default connections. Connect the roughness file outColor R to the specular roughness attribute. As for the bump, create an AI bump node, connect the outColor R attribute to the bump map, and finally the out value to the normal camera of the shader. I have a simple light in the scene with an HDRI connected, so let's do a render and set the desired bump value. By mistake, I was not waiting for the optics denoiser to take effect or clear out, that's why I wasn't seeing the bump effect. So let's open the final scene. It's very basic, just a backdrop and an additional area light. For the materials, I have connected the different variations we exported out of Substance. As you can see in the render. For the backends, you can get away with a simple U-shift with a color correct node. I also have some depth of field in the shot camera. To get the desired focus distance, you can create a locator and show the object details in the viewport. Okay, now just increase the camera samples and the resolution to do the final render. So this is it, the final result. Not perfect, but this is what I got. Hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions or if I can answer any question related to this workflow. Thank you, see you next time.